turned violent. Protesters set fire to ANC members' homes, and suspected ANC supporters were attacked. Protesters burned down this library and community center. South African authorities have dispatched some 14,000 police just to keep the peace. While police patrol the streets, opposition parties like the Democratic Alliance are taking to the radio in search of votes.
The ANC has never been so weak.
We are suffering in South Africa now.
South Africa has on average 50 murders a day, 7 times the rate of the United States.
You do not feel safe in your home.
Across South Africa, electricity load shedding has in some cases brought the smooth running of the country to a slow crawl. And without immediate action on the part of government, could a similar water crisis also be in the pipeline?
A lot of people think you're a crook.
Is that so?
We're living under a black apartheid government.
In South Africa, the party of both liberation and government, the ANC, kicks off its national congress. It should be a celebration. Africa's powerhouse is riding 3 years of impressive economic growth, but there are no balloons and streamers this time. Instead, the ANC is facing a major uprising from its base, driven by the country's mounting inequality. Nearly 1 million South Africans are on the streets in the biggest strike since apartheid. COSATU, the country's trade union federation, is locked in a battle with the government over wages for teachers, doctors, and other public sector workers. But the strike is about much more than that. 13 years into the new South Africa, real unemployment is almost 40%, and a third of the population lives in dire poverty. It's not that the government hasn't created growth. The number of super-rich South Africans has grown 50% in 5 years. The country now has 55 BMW dealerships. The problem is that the growth is simply not being shared. Not by the shack dwellers facing eviction, not by the patients of a shredded healthcare system, and not by the workers taking to the streets. And now for the big picture, we go to Durban on the country's east coast, where we're joined by Ashwin Desai, a controversial professor. I want to start big picture. I think Canadians were really connected to the anti-apartheid struggle. And then there was that euphoric moment in 1994, and Nelson Mandela was going to lead the Rainbow Nation into the future. Can you locate this huge strike and this political moment for us 13 years into the new South Africa?
There was a honeymoon period, not only because it was Mandela, but of course it was an alliance. It was the South African Communist Party, it was COSATU, it was the ANC, but it was more than that. It was a nation in alliance behind the banner of Mandela. He was going to lead us on the long road to freedom, and he was the flag bearer.
Now, you were a labor organizer under apartheid, organizing workers under a very repressive regime. What does it mean in this moment that workers are organizing against the ANC government? What's the difference?
Well, I mean, clearly, one of the big differences visually, which you've probably seen on your TV screens, is that the composition of the strikers are a bit different. I mean, to just see in a country like South Africa, highly racialized, suddenly Indian, colored, white workers joining in their numbers with COSATU, the incredible amounts of unity between what was once kind of what we see as right-wing unions, old white unions were organizing the public sector, making common cause with COSATU unions. That's different. What's the same, in some senses, is the viciousness of the repression. So there's a difference, but there's a similarity. The use of rubber bullets, the use of arresting people, the use of summary firing by the government. And also, ironically, the language of the government is the same in sense, that these are workers, they must be patient, they must wait, and something will arrive. So a bit of discontinuity, a bit of change clearly, but lots of similarities too.
Now, according to the government, there's 5% growth. They've got the first budget surplus in South Africa in recorded history, and everything is booming. So where is the disconnect?
But it was ironic. People are already saying, how can a minister of finance talk so proudly about a surplus? I mean, it's like those old biblical times where the granaries were full, but the people were starving. So how can you go and celebrate a surplus on the one hand and then say you don't have money to pay a kind of basic wage to teachers, nurses, and so on? So, but this is the ideology. The ideology that they were touting to us was growth, then redistribution. But it's just become growth, 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 and redistribution is really some word that's a kind of museum piece.
I read a newspaper account of a protest sign from the strike this week saying the ANC government is the same as the apartheid government. How are we supposed to understand? Is that just exaggeration?
There are fundamental differences, of course. It's a black government in power, and so it's not exactly the same. But in many senses also, the way in which people are being treated on the ground, the false promises, the kind of labeling of the poor, in a way that actually says you are in fact at fault that you are poor. That kind of language has insinuated itself into the South African government. So black economic empowerment, for example, is the main weapon that the government is using to supposedly de-racialize South Africa. But the same people get empowered time and again, and those people are allied to the ruling class. We now have people's capitalism, but the people are few. Of course, to many people living out in shacks today without water, without lights, whose shacks get burnt down because they use electricity illegally, it looks the same. They feel the same. The oppressor might have changed color, but there's still an oppressor who's often using the language of the apartheid state and the very apartheid repressive apparatus to beat and bludgeon people.
Disgust over the ANC's perceived slow delivery of basic services has turned violent. Protesters set fire to ANC members' homes, and suspected ANC supporters were attacked. Protesters burned down this library and community center.
People are actually seeing through the mythologies of the Rainbow Nation, that the state shall deliver, that the ANC is a liberation party that is just getting into government and will finally have a Damascus turn once again and change its policies, and we shall have houses, we shall have employment, and so on. The miracle is not Mandela and the long walk to freedom. As we like to say in South Africa, Mandela said it's a long walk to freedom. He didn't tell us there's going to be so many toll roads in between, so you couldn't actually get to freedom. Exactly at the time when half of South Africa is unemployed and doesn't have access to welfare. There's an emergent, militant, political culture that is cutting across racial lines and is starting to knock on the door of the ruling party.
If there are tyre burnings and stone throwing, and then people say, perhaps we've made our case through protest, perhaps now vote for the ANC again, and we see that we'll take up the issue again after the elections.
And those very CVs that people put out there, we were so many years in Robben Island, we were so many years in exile, we have helped to liberate you, and we will finally deliver, just be patient. Well, that kind of language doesn't wash anymore.
Ashwin, I'd like to keep talking to you, but I'm afraid that people's TVs will burst into flames.
Do you ever think your life is going to get better, Joseph?
Maybe my life would change if the Nationalist Party came back, not the ANC.
I don't believe you. Come on. That was a white government that put you down, that treated you terribly. You can't really believe that.
But in terms of work, they didn't oppress us. We didn't struggle for work then.
A lot of people think you're a crook.
Is that so?